Story 1. I work at a small convenience store in Ohio. One Saturday, this American Karen came in screaming because we wouldn't sell her beer at 9:05 p.m. I calmly told her state law says no sales past 9. She slammed her receipt on the counter and yelled she was calling the police because we were discriminating against her. Fine, whatever. I told her we could do that. 5 minutes later, 2 cops showed up. She immediately points at them, waving her arms and shouts, "You guys better arrest him, he's breaking the law." The cops calmly asked what law. She starts ranting about denying my right to a beverage. They asked for ID. She refused. She threatened them, saying she knew people in high places. The officers just exchanged glances and explained that threatening law enforcement was a crime. Her face went pale. And suddenly she was apologizing, saying she didn't mean that. She ended up getting cited for disorderly conduct, and the cops were laughing the entire time. Story 2. I was at a family picnic in Michigan when I saw this Karen arguing with a park ranger. She had parked in a no parking zone and refused to move, saying she was above local ordinances because she was visiting from America. The ranger called the cops, and when they arrived, she immediately started pointing and yelling that she would have all 3 of them fired and arrested. She even shouted that she knew the mayor personally. The officers calmly asked her to explain the crime she claimed was committed. She stammered and eventually said, "You're denying me my freedom." One cop told her that freedom doesn't mean immunity from rules. That's when she started crying, screaming, and threatening to sue for harassment. The cops just walked her to her car and told her she was being issued multiple citations. She sat in the driver's seat, still arguing, but when she saw the paperwork, she tried to throw it at the windshield and ended up tearing it in half by accident. She drove off, muttering, and we all laughed about it for weeks. Story 3. I'm a mother in New Jersey. My kid and I were at a public pool when a Karen started yelling at the lifeguards because they wouldn't let her teen son jump off the high dive without a lifeguard's permission. She called 911, screaming that the lifeguards were child endangerers and demanding the police remove them. By the time the cops arrived, she was pacing, ranting about her constitutional rights and pointing at the officers like they were villains. They asked her to calm down and explain what crime had occurred. She said, "You are all conspiring against me and my son." The officers told her that yelling at and threatening them is a crime. Her jaw dropped, and she immediately switched tactics, screaming apologies and asking if she could just leave. She ended up getting a citation for harassment and disorderly conduct. Her son looked mortified, and my kid whispered, "Wow, some people really don't think before screaming." Story 4. I was a witness at a small-town courthouse in Georgia. This one, Karen got arrested for refusing to leave a grocery store where she was banned for aggressive behavior. She screamed she was calling the police on herself, then somehow got herself more entangled by yelling at the responding officers about discrimination and demanding they arrest the store employees. During booking, she kept threatening the cops, saying she'd get their jobs. One officer leaned down, pointed out calmly that threatening officers was illegal. Her face turned bright red, and she started apologizing while still trying to argue. By the time her lawyer arrived, she had already confessed to screaming threats and admitted she probably shouldn't have said that. The courtroom laughed. The judge barely restrained a smile when reading her citation. Story 5. I'm a patrol officer in Arizona. One summer, a Karen called 911 claiming a neighbor stole her lawn decorations. When we arrived, she immediately started shouting at us, waving a spatula, and demanding we arrest her neighbor. The officers asked her what crime had been committed. She screamed, "Trespassing, theft, conspiracy." When we explained that she was the one creating the scene, she accused the cops of taking sides and threatened them with lawsuits. Within 2 minutes, she was in cuffs for threatening law enforcement. She was bawling, begging to be let go, promising to never do it again. while the officers quietly filled out her paperwork, shaking their heads at how fast she went from aggressor to pleading. Story 6. I'm a high school teacher in New York. One day, I was volunteering at a community fair when this Karen started screaming at a food stand because they ran out of a particular hot dog brand. She called 911 mid-rant, threatening to have the officers put them all in jail. When the cops arrived, she immediately turned on them, pointing fingers and shouting, "You're all part of this conspiracy." They calmly asked her to explain what crime had actually occurred. Her face turned red, and she shouted that she didn't need to explain because she was an American citizen and entitled to justice. Within minutes, she realized the officers weren't backing down. One cop leaned in and said, "Threatening us is a crime." Her jaw dropped, and she started sobbing, muttering apologies while trying to justify herself. She walked away with 2 citations and a very public lesson in humility. Story 7. I'm a parent in Florida. I was at a playground with my kid when a Karen arrived screaming because another kid accidentally took her child's swing. She called the police immediately, claiming assault. When officers arrived, she started yelling that they had to arrest everyone responsible. The cops asked for names, details, and evidence. She didn't have any. She began threatening them, saying she'd have their badges revoked. The officers calmly explained that threatening law enforcement was a criminal offence. That's when her bravado crumbled. She went pale, started apologising, and insisted she wasn't serious. By the end of it, she had been issued 2 citations, and the other parents were quietly laughing at how quickly she imploded. Story 8. I'm a cop in Texas. One summer evening, a Karen called 911 claiming her neighbour stole her Wi-Fi. By the time we arrived, she was screaming at us, saying we had to arrest the neighbour immediately. She even threatened to sue us personally for negligence. The officers calmly asked her to explain the crime, and she just waved her hands and said, "You're supposed to know." When we told her that threatening officers is illegal, she froze, then started apologising and saying, "I didn't mean it, I just got upset." She left with a citation for disorderly conduct and a reminder that Wi-Fi disputes don't involve the police. Story 9. I was a witness at a traffic stop in California. A Karen had been pulled over for speeding and started yelling at the officer, claiming she had diplomatic immunity because she worked in an office with American consulate papers. She threatened the officer, saying he would be fired and jailed if he didn't let her go. The officer calmly asked for proof of diplomatic status. She stuttered, went red in the face, and kept muttering threats. By the time backup arrived, she realised she had nothing, and within minutes, she was ticketed for multiple violations and disorderly conduct. She spent the next half hour pleading with the officers like a child asking for forgiveness. Story 10. I'm a security guard in Chicago. One evening, a Karen stormed into the building screaming that she called the cops for discrimination. By the time the officers arrived, she had started pointing at them and threatening them personally, insisting they better do something or face consequences. They calmly asked her to explain what had actually happened. She couldn't. She shouted that the system was against her and tried to intimidate the cops further. One officer told her that threatening law enforcement was a criminal offence. Her face turned pale, her voice cracked, and she suddenly tried to apologise profusely while still attempting to justify her behaviour. She walked out with citations and a lifetime ban from the building, muttering about American rights the whole way. Story 11. I'm a store manager in Minnesota. A Karen called 911 because she claimed a cashier stole her coupon. When the police arrived, she immediately began screaming, demanding arrests, and pointing at the officers like they were criminals. They calmly asked her to explain the offence. She waved her hands, said it was theft, and threatened them personally. After being told that threatening cops is a crime, she literally stumbled backward, started apologising, and tried to claim she didn't understand the law. She ended up cited for harassment, left the store, and a few employees commented she looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Story 12. I'm a cop in Denver. One afternoon, a Karen called 911 because her neighbor's dog barked too loudly. When I arrived, she immediately started yelling at me, waving her arms and threatening to have me removed from the force if I didn't deal with it immediately. I calmly asked for details. She shouted that she didn't need to provide proof and that I worked for her. I explained that threatening officers is illegal. That's when her eyes widened, she stammered, and suddenly her voice dropped to almost a whisper. I wasn't serious. I issued a citation for threats and disorderly conduct. She drove off fuming, still muttering about ungrateful law enforcement. Story 13. I'm a mum in New Jersey. I witnessed a Karen flipping out at a grocery store because she claimed the cashier stole her coupon points. She threatened to call the police and have everyone arrested. When the officers arrived, she started screaming that they would be personally responsible if she didn't get justice. One officer calmly said, "Threatening law enforcement is illegal." Her eyes went wide and she started sputtering excuses, claiming she didn't know that was illegal. She ended up leaving with a citation and a very public humiliation as all the other shoppers quietly laughed behind her back. Story 14. I work security in Las Vegas. A Karen started shouting at a group of teenagers for standing too close to a hotel entrance. She then called the police and threatened the responding officers, claiming they needed to arrest everyone immediately. When the cops arrived, she doubled down, waving her hands and demanding action. They asked her calmly to explain what crime had occurred. She couldn't. When told that threatening officers is a crime, she froze mid-sentence, went pale, and muttered a series of awkward apologies while trying to maintain her authority. She left with citations and a lot of embarrassed onlookers shaking their heads. Story 15. I'm a teacher in Boston. One of my students' parents, a Karen, got into a shouting match outside the school because she didn't like a new schedule. She called the police and threatened the officers personally, claiming, "You will regret this." When they arrived, she tried to argue, pointing fingers and spitting out legal threats. The officers remained calm and reminded her that threatening law enforcement is illegal. Her face turned red, then white, and she immediately started apologizing. She even muttered something like, "I guess I went too far." They cited her for disorderly conduct and left, still laughing about how quickly her bravado disappeared. Story 16. I'm a witness in Atlanta. A Karen got into a massive argument at a gas station over a $2 overcharge. She called 911 and threatened the police officers personally, insisting they would be fired if she didn't get her way. When they arrived, she escalated, pointing fingers and screaming, while everyone around stared. The cops calmly asked her to clarify the actual offence. She couldn't. Once informed that threatening law enforcement is a crime, she froze and her rant completely fell apart. She ended up leaving with a citation, muttering angrily, while the crowd quietly cheered. Story 17. I work at a pharmacy in Arizona. A Karen threatened to have the police arrest everyone because she couldn't get a prescription filled without proper documentation. When the officers arrived, she immediately pointed fingers, shouted about rights being violated, and even tried to threaten them personally. The officers calmly asked for the facts. She had none. When they explained that threatening law enforcement is illegal, she suddenly went pale, muttered, "I was joking, I didn't mean it," and slunk out of the store with a citation in hand. Customers whispered and laughed as she fumed in disbelief,